Are the New York Mets holding out on signing Pete Alonso because they have their eyes on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. next offseason? I'll talk about Vladdy and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, this offseason, we have seen a lot of talk on Mets Twitter, social media in general, about the idea of the New York Mets pursuing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. next offseason. Fans have made this a story. The idea that the reason why the Mets aren't signing Pete Alonso is because they're holding back that money because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is the better first baseman and he's going to hit the market next offseason. Now, I've sort of shrugged off this notion pretty much all winter just because I am a Pete Alonso stan. I believe the Mets are going to re-sign Pete, and I just never really wanted to give this that much thought. But it's slow right now, and the Pete Alonso negotiation has gotten to a point where there's really not much else we can cover. So let's look ahead. Let's think about the alternatives. Does it make sense to just say no to Pete Alonso? Hey, you want to give us that 3-year offer? We're fine. We don't want you for even 3 years. We'll give you a 1-year deal, but that's pretty much it because we have our eyes on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Is Vladdy that worth it? Let's go through his career a little bit. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. debuted in 2019, just like Pete Alonso. What's the difference? Why is Vladdy not a free agent right now? Well, he had his service time manipulated, but I don't even know if I would say that because he was 20 years old. He was not anywhere near as polished of a hitter as Pete Alonso was back in 2019. If you remember when we got to the home run derby, he only had a handful of home runs that year, but got to compete because of the name power, and he put on a show, as did Pete Alonso, of course, winning the tournament. But if you remember, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was really the talk of that home run derby because of the monster rounds he put up, and it sort of was a promise of what could be to come. Now, that season, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was nowhere near on the level of Pete Alonso. He hit 272, had a 339 on base, 433 slug, 15 homers, and 69 RBIs, which is nice, in 123 games. Good season, but Pete Alonso had 53 homers and 120 RBIs. 2020, he was okay, but once we got to 2021, where Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was 22 years old, we saw the potential. We saw what this guy could be, which is one of the best hitters in baseball. That year, he was the best offensive player in the American League, would have won the AL MVP if not for Shohei Ohtani doing it on both sides of the ball. You look at the numbers. He hit 311, had a 401 on base, 601 slug. So for those of you at home, on base plus slugging, that's an OPS over 1,000. Had 48 homers, 111 RBIs, a 166 WRC plus, which we're going to talk about throughout the show today. WRC plus is weighted runs created plus. It's a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100, very similar to OPS plus. So if you have a 166 WRC plus, you're 66% or 66 points better than your league average hitter. Anything over 130 is great. So you get to the 160 range, elite stuff. He had a 6-win season that year in 2021. Now, 2022, 2023, Vladdy took a step back. He was not hitting over 300. He was not near 400 on base. He was not near a 600 slug. He dropped off where his on base was less than 350. The batting average is in the 260 to 270 range, and the home runs dropped, to the 25 to 30 range instead of the 48 home runs. And he was driving in over 90 runs a season. So he was not quite that elite player that he was in 2021. But then 2024, we saw elite Vladdy again. This past season, he hit 323 with a 396 on base and a 544 slug, 30 home runs, 103 runs driven in, a 165 WRC plus, so he got right back into that elite range. Had a 5.5 win season. Pete Alonso, I don't think he's ever sniffed 5 wins. His best season, I think, was his rookie year when it comes to WAR, and it was, a 4-win season, if I'm not mistaken? 4.7 win season. So I guess he did sniff it. But that's the closest he's ever gotten to a 5-win season. 21, 22, F4 of 3.5 and 3.8. So it shows you that there's no doubt that in a vacuum, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is the better player. Then you look at the batted ball data. Last year, Vladdy topped the league in expected batting average. His expected batting average was 321. His expected slug was 567. So he actually should have slugged a little bit better than he actually did. Pete Alonso's expected batting average, for comparison, 242. His expected slug, 461. So significantly better batted ball data for Vladdy, who hits the ball as hard as anyone, doesn't strike out. Okay, this is not a guy that's striking out 25% of the time. You're looking more in the, depending on the year, 13 to 18% range, less than 20% every year of his career, if I'm not mistaken. So you have that side of it. He is just a better overall hitter. He's also entering his age 26 season now. When he's a free agent, he'll be entering his age 27 season. So if the 6 years that you're getting from the beginning of this contract, if you're talking about age 27 through 32. If a player's prime is supposed to be 26 through 32, you're looking at those first 6 seasons you'd have Vladdy. He would be in his absolute prime. Meanwhile, Pete Alonso, you already got half of those prime seasons. And I think really, if we're looking at Pete Alonso's career, his prime might have been the 6 years we just watched. And he might be on the other side of it. Now, I think he still has a couple years left, but you're clearly getting a player at a different stage of his career if you were to sign Vladimir Guerrero Jr. My only concern about Vladdy is the peaks and valleys. The valleys have not been bad. Don't get me wrong. 2022, 2023, he was not a bad hitter. But for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to deliver on the contract that he is expecting to get, we're going to talk about that in the next segment, he needs to be 2021 or 2024 Vladdy. He needs to be the guy that's getting on base close to a 400 clip, batting over 300, slugging a ton. He doesn't have to hit 48 home runs like he did in 2021, but he's at least got to get to 30 while doing everything else that he did this past season. If you look at what he did in those 2 years that are sandwiched in the middle of his elite seasons in 21 and 2024, so 2022 and 2023, across those seasons, he combined to hit 269 with a 341 on base, 462 slug, 125 WRC plus with 58 home runs, 191 runs driven in, a 4.6 F4. Pete Alonso, if you're looking at his 2 seasons that are these down years going into free agency that everyone's throwing out there, and how he really isn't anywhere near the player he once was, and all of that talk about Pete Alonso, right? His down seasons, 229 average, so 40 points worse than Vladdy across 22 and 23. On base, also worse, 324 compared to 341. Slug, 480 compared to 462. WRC plus 4 points off, 121 compared to Vladdy's 125. But the home runs, 80 home runs for Pete, 206 runs driven in, and the WAR total actually better at 4.9 compared to 4.6. So when you get to Vladdy's valleys, I don't know if he really is that much better than Pete, even in his valleys. Now, Pete might be living in that valley. Pete might just be stuck at this level of being a guy that can flirt with 40, drive in 90 plus, but he's going to be a frustrating player when it comes to his streakiness, his lack of a batting average, sometimes lack of on-base prowess, although I don't think that really has anything to do with his walk rate. It's just not hitting for a high average. But how much more is Vladdy worth than Pete Alonso? Is he worth spending significantly more to get him because he's that much of a better hitter? We're going to talk about that in the next segment. What will that contract look like? First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And Game Time Picks is their feature. It's going to make it easier to get tickets for your favorite live events because of Game Time Picks. They'll filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can also view your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can also use their all-in pricing feature so you don't have to get surprised by fees when you check out. The all-in pricing will show you exactly what you're going to pay for your seats. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so what is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. going to command in free agency? Well, he was on a podcast this offseason, and he actually did say he's interested in staying in Toronto. He's ready to go for an extension with the Jays if they meet his asking price. However, he said, what they offered me is not even close to what I'm looking for. And he noted the most recent offer was for $340 million. He talked about the fact that Shohei Ohtani changed the game for Juan Soto. And Juan Soto just changed the game for me. Ken Rosenthal, the Athletic, speculated that the contract that Vladdy might sign would be somewhere between $500 to $600 million. Why would it be at that level? Well, again, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., just like Juan Soto, is hitting free agency at a younger age, and teams value players in their 20s. They're looking at those first couple years, and they are salivating over getting Vladdy when he's 27 years old. That's amazing, right? Well, let's just say he gets to $500 million. How many years are you dividing that contract? We'll call it 13. That takes him all the way up to his age 40 season. It does not pay for his age 40 season. It takes him through his age 39 season. If he gets $500 million, a 13-year deal, you're looking at $38.46 million per. Let's actually make it a 14-year deal because that would line up with Juan Soto. Let me do the math on this real quick. If it's a 14-year deal, looking at $35.7 million per season for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So if that's the ceiling, though, what's the floor? The floor is $340 million. You just turn that down. How many years is that over? If it's a 10-year deal, it's it's $34 million a season. But he turned down that. So let's just say $400 million. Let's say he doesn't get to the $500 million mark. And everything we just saw with Juan Soto would suggest that he should get there because, let's be honest, Juan Soto, not really heralded for his defense, while he at least plays the outfield instead of first base. I mean, you're really talking about signing these guys for their bats. So when it comes to Vladdy, let's say it's $400 million. And let's say he gets a 13-year deal. Pretty reasonable. $30.8 million per season. That makes some sense. 12 years. $33.3 million per season. If he gets to $400 million over 12. If it's an 11-year deal, you're talking about $36.36 million. Bottom line, if he gets to $400 million, which is just a little bit more than he was already offered, and they were nowhere close to meeting his asking price, he's going to be at least a $30 million player, and there's every chance that he's trying to push and get into at least $35 million, probably wants $40 million per season. Because if Juan Soto is going to make $51 million per, why can't I make $51 million per? I don't think it's realistic because he's a first baseman, but still. What's holding the Mets back from signing Pete Alonso to a 6-year deal? Right now, the market. But let's just say in general, like what would they have been opposed to about giving him 6 years? That's paying for his age 30 through age 35 seasons. They don't want to get that much into the 30s. Well, for Vladdy, yes, you get 27 through 29. Love that. But you're going to pay for age 30 through 35, and you're probably going to pay for 35 through 39 at least. So that back end of the contract that you're scared of with Pete Alonso, it's terrifying with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in comparison. Now, again, better hitter. But Vladdy is a far cry from Juan Soto when it comes to consistency offensively. Soto every year is getting on base at a 400 clip. Vlad has done that twice out of 6 seasons. It's great years, but there's those peaks and valleys. He should not be paid anywhere close to Juan Soto. Should he get $500 million? No, I don't think he should get that either, but the market might push him there. Let's go back to the contract again real quick, right? Let's say he only gets $340 million and it's a 9-year deal. Okay? That would line him up for the years you would pay Pete Alonso on a 6-year deal, because it's 3 additional years, and then he's 3 years younger than Pete Alonso is right now, or he will be when he gets to free agency. You'd be looking at, on the low end, because he turned down $340, $37.77 million per season. Best case scenario for Pete Alonso when it comes to AAV is getting $30 million, or there's been some talk about him edging out Miguel Cabrera. I thought Miguel Cabrera's AAV was $29.2 million, but ultimately I guess it was a little over 31. So whatever it is, it's not going to get close to what you'd be paying that Vladdy and over way more years. Okay. If Pete Alonso were to get a 6-year deal at this point, which is very unlikely, he'd probably be looking at a little bit better than Christian Walker money. He'd be looking at 21, 22 million for those years. So yes, you don't get the 3 years on the front end, the 27 through age 29 seasons. You already enjoyed them. But when it comes to the seasons in the 30s, you're probably paying Vladdy at least $10 million more than Pete Alonso would get. Probably closer to $15 million more than Pete Alonso would get per year. And then you're talking about longer term where the commitment is even worse, or it's even more risk that you're taking on. I have pushed back on this notion of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. all offseason because of that. Because if you're apprehensive to give Pete Alonso a 5-year deal even, why in the world is that same front office licking their chops to give Vladdy 13 years? Why? I get fans want the shiny new toy. I get that. But to me, there is shinier and brighter new toys that will be on the horizon at some point. Gunnar Henderson and Elly De La Cruz are both Scott Boras clients. What does that mean? They're likely going to get to free agency. I think Paul Skeens might be as well, but that's a different type of player. But if you're just talking about position players that can be added, I want to say Gunnar might be 3 years away, 3 or 4 years away. Let me look it up real quick. But you're looking at, he hits free agency in 2029, so he has 25, 26, 27. So 4 years. Yeah, you got to wait a little bit to get to Gunnar Henderson, for sure. But I would rather wait for Gunnar Henderson to be, 27 years old, a shortstop, or either you're moving Lindor off a short at that point in his career, or you're, sliding Gunnar to third. Same thing with Elly De La Cruz, guys that are good defensive players that still rake, over getting a first baseman. And you talk about the defense with Pete Alonso. We're going to go through some numbers in the next segment, sort of further my case here. But Juan Soto is a bat-first player. Vladimir Guerrero is a bat-first player. Now, the two of them together, from 2026 through 2030, that might be the best 1-2 punch in baseball. And maybe that's worth everything that you take on the back end. Getting those two guys in their prime, they can both get on base at a 400 clip. They can both hit over 300. They can both hit 30-plus bombs. Those guys in the middle of your lineup is elite. I get that. I do. But what I also understand is if you line up their contracts, you're talking about paying Soto at least $51 million. And if he opts out and you trigger in the opt-in, and you pay him $55 million per for the end of that deal. You got him at 55. Let's say Vladdy's at 35 conservatively. You're talking about paying for these guys in their age 36 through age 40 seasons. The end of their careers, we're looking at 2036 to 2039. Paying them a combined $90 million when they are both past 35, pushing 40, when we have seen these contracts historically turn into a disaster, and you want 2 of them on your books. Juan Soto is the type of hitter that could age well all the way through, I should say, and could still be hitting at 39. I don't think Vladdy is on the same level as Juan Soto. I just don't. I think he's going to have seasons as good, if not even better than Soto. But he's going to have other years where he's not. I just haven't seen the consistency from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to warrant it. And if he does show that consistency this year, if he puts up another year on line with 21 and 24, he's absolutely going to be banging the table saying $500 million or bust. I need to make that much money. And to me, that's an extreme that is just not realistic for the New York Mets. It's not. Not when you're already paying Juan Soto over $50 million per season. How much better is Vladdy than Pete Alonso? Is he $250 million better? I want to do a final comparison to close out the show. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We're getting closer and closer to our next goal of 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so what's the biggest question mark surrounding Pete Alonso that's been thrown around about why the Mets should be hesitant to give him a contract? The defense. He's a horrible defensive first baseman, right? Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for his career is worth -6 defensive runs saved at first. Pete Alonso has been worth +2 defensive runs saved. He's actually graded out by that metric as an above-average defensive first baseman for his career. Now, a lot of that is due to a 2023 season where he was worth 6 defensive runs saved, so well above average. But overall, he hasn't been that bad by that metric. But Vladdy hasn't been horrible by that metric either. You look at outs above average, which is the defensive metric that I tend to lean towards more. It's more range-based. I just think it's a better overall grading of what a fielder is. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at first base, -31 outs above average. Pete Alonso, -24 outs above average. And these are stats that accumulate. The more you play a position, if you are a poor defender, the more you're going to be in the negative when it comes to outs above average. If you're Francisco Lindor, the more he plays shortstop, the more that outs above average total climbs. Pete Alonso has played well over 2,000 more innings at first base than Vladdy because he's just been on the field more. He's DH'd less. And also Vladdy in his rookie season got a ton of time at third. He started off as a third baseman. So if you compare the two, Pete Alonso is a better defensive first baseman. And I don't watch Vladdy play every single day, but I'm sorry. I think he actually might have won like a ridiculous Gold Glove, which, I mean, whatever. Personally, looking at the metrics, they painted the picture of Pete Alonso being a much better fielder, or at least a better fielder. And overall, from what I've seen, I don't think Pete really hurts you that much there. But regardless, the other issue with Pete Alonso that you can say is the decline in OPS. Decline in batting average, overall abilities as a hitter, which are valid for sure. With that said, let's look at the last couple of years. Let's look at since COVID. So 2021 through 2024, the last 4 full seasons of these guys. That also includes Vladdy's 2 elite years. So you're including a 48 home run season, and you're not including Pete Alonso's rookie season where he hit 53 homers. Compare them on production. Vladdy, a 293 hitter. Pete Alonso, 248. Vladdy, 370 on base. Pete Alonso, 336. Vladdy, 517 slug. Pete Alonso, 499. So across the board, Vladdy's better. But then we get into the counting stats, the actual production. Vladdy, 136 home runs. Pete Alonso, 157. Vladdy, 405 RBIs. Pete Alonso, 431. Vladdy, 389 runs scored. Pete Alonso, 359. So the only place where Vladdy has done better in those counting stats is runs scored because he gets on base more. But let's narrow it and take off that 2021 season. Let's look at the last 3 years. So that includes the 2 more middling years for Vladdy and his elite season. That includes a really great year for Pete Alonso in 2022, but also the last 2 years where everyone has talked about a decline. Over the last 3 years, Pete Alonso edges Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in home runs 120 to 88. Pretty big difference. 32 home run difference in a 3-year span. So you can expect maybe 10 additional home runs per season with Pete instead of Vladdy. He's just a better home run hitter. RBIs edges him out 337 to 294. He has even scored more runs than Vladimir Guerrero Jr., 278 to 266. So Vladdy scored a ton in 2021. Overall, in a vacuum, is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. a better player than Pete Alonso? Yes. Is he a better hitter? Absolutely. Hits the ball harder, has a chance to be a 300 hitter each year, gets on base at a better clip. All of it. I understand. But when we start to talk about contracts, career earnings, when it's all said and done, because of when they both have hit free agency, you have a chance to sign Pete Alonso at a value at this point. Now, we don't know what that number is going to be, and I understand the frustration in these contract talks. I get it. On the worst case scenario, you are going to pay Pete Alonso $32 million a season for the next 3 years. And you're going to get him off your books and not have to worry about how he's going to age in his 30s. There's a chance you sign him for even less than that. If you do happen to end up agreeing to terms on a longer-term deal, because that's what Pete Alonso ultimately wants. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure that's not necessarily what the Mets want. I don't think they want 6-7 years. But do they want 4 or 5 years at a more reasonable average annual value? I could see that actually being the case. I'm starting to think maybe it's 4 for 100 with an opt-out after the second year. That seems a little bit more reasonable. But again, you're going to pay way less. You're not going to have that top-end production of what Vladdy can produce. But as long as Pete Alonso hits those home runs, and if he hits them after Juan Soto is getting on base at a 400 clip, he is going to have inflated RBI totals, and he's going to give you exactly what you need at a fraction of the cost. So I know Mets fans love the idea of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. In my opinion, if the Mets don't sign Pete Alonso, you are best served either pivoting to Alex Bregman and have him be your third baseman, Vientos at first, or regardless, pivoting to a future where Mark Vientos is your starting first baseman, and third base is the position you got to figure out. Whether that be your prospects, your young players, whether you got to make a trade at some point, or maybe there is a free agent that hits the market. Who knows? Maybe instead you're looking at Vladdy's teammate Bo Bichette next year if he has a good season and you slide him from short to third. But to me, I do not see the value in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Not that he's not a great hitter, but because the market is going to overpay him, just like the market overpaid Juan Soto. And I don't think you can have too many guys on your books that are getting paid 150 cents on the dollar. I just don't think that that's feasible, even for Steve Cohen. Yes, he has the money to go into the tax as much as he wants to. And if that's his vision, if that's what he wants to do, I will thoroughly enjoy the prime years where we're not thinking about Vladdy and Juan Soto when they're in their late 30s. And we're watching these guys at the end of their 20s, in their early 30s, put together maybe a dynastic run. And if they win 2 World Series and then they have a couple years where Steve Cohen is paying absurd tax dollars to deal with these 2 albatross contracts on his books at the end, fine. But if you are really considering how David Stearns operates, the idea that the Mets are holding out on Pete Alonso because they want Vladdy, in my opinion, and it's my opinion, you can feel otherwise, that is patently absurd. The Pete Alonso situation is its own thing, completely separate from Vladdy. Next offseason, maybe that's a discussion that we have. For right now, this is the only Vladimir Guerrero Jr. discussion. And my answer is probably not going to happen. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's show. To close out the week, assuming we do not get any more news, Thursday's show, I want to take a look into Brandon Nimmo. What does he have to do next year to be better than he was last season? Is that contract still a good one? We're going to talk about that a little bit. Then on the final show of the week, again, assuming no news, I will be going through and talking some prospects. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a full top 10 or if we're just going to talk about the absolute top of the Met system, but we will have a Friday Farm Report for you. So if you don't want to miss out on any of those shows, Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast if you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Again, help us get to our next goal of 12,000 subscribers. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. If you want to follow me on social, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that's covering everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.